Not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker.
Hey everyone, it's time for Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mance.
And I'm Steve Morris.
And on this episode of Enterprise Incidents, break out the Tranya, ladies and gentlemen. We are doing a deep dive into the Corbomite Maneuver. We are going in production order. The Corbomite Maneuver was the first episode of Star Trek filmed after Where No Man Has Gone Before sold it to series. So before we get into it, Steve, give me your take on the Corbomite Maneuver. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Think it's okay? Where does it stand for you?
I think it's great. I like it a lot. It is not in my top 5 Star Trek episodes, but it's a really good one. I have one criticism of the show, which we'll get to, but in general, I think it's so good and it's so amazing. Like, you know, we've already talked about the cage, and while it isn't a perfect episode of television, it isn't the Star Trek we love. It's still really impressive. We talked about Where No Man Has Gone Before, which I think is great. And this is it's amazing beginning run. And one thing I just want to say, I'm so happy that we are going in production order because we get to see DeForest Kelley's first moments on Star Trek, which we wouldn't have done it because we started with Man Trap. That's a completely different thing, you know? So I'm really excited that we're doing this one next. What's your general feeling about Corbomite?
Well, I'm kind of with you on this. I really, really love the episode. It's not in my top 10, but you know, the episodes that are in my top 10 are really, really, really good. And the Corbomite Maneuver, Steve, is really, really, really good. And I too am thrilled that we're going in production order because you really get to see the evolution of this brand new, groundbreaking show that was paving its own way with each and every episode. We get to see them trying things out when it came to pacing, when it came to cinematography, when it came to the relationship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and definitely when it came to Leonard Nimoy really kind of finding his way to play Spock. He's not quite there yet, but there is one particular thing that happens in this episode that laid the foundation for Leonard Nimoy to really nail it. And you're shaking your head. You know, this is audio, but you're shaking your head like you know what I'm talking about.
No, I have a guess. So when we get there, I can't wait. I have a guess of what I think it is.
But what I love about this episode and what I really love about it is this episode represents Star Trek at its best, or one of its best. It feels like Star Trek. It captures the spirit of Star Trek. And if they were able to air the episodes in the order that they were produced, I think, for one thing, this would have gotten much, much better reviews than the Man Trap did. But I think it would have really been like, for anyone watching who had not seen Where No Man Has Gone Before or The Cage, and most people didn't, no one did, they would have been like, okay, I think I get what the show is going to be. A spaceship out there where no one has gone before, exploring strange new worlds, and they're really out there and they don't know what's ahead of them. And it's as much about us in the present as it is about our potential future and the development of these characters and the relationships to each other. This episode sets up so much. And while it's not in my top 10, I do think that the Corbomite Maneuver represents so many of the aspirational qualities that I truly love about Star Trek. In particular, William Shatner as James T. Kirk. His performance is so perfect in this episode. And so many of the reasons why I've always looked up to Shatner as Kirk, or just looked up to James T. Kirk, is right here in this episode. We're going to get to all of that. And I actually hadn't seen this episode in a while. And I have to say, Steve, that we're only 3 episodes in, and I am already having a blast. And I am also having a renewed perspective because I've jumped around. I've watched the episodes that I wanted. You know, I haven't gone in production order since I was a kid.
Well, I'm having the same experience, and what's so cool, the other thing that's happening is I'm sure that my way of watching Star Trek is pretty similar to yours, which is like it's late at night, and I don't have anything else to do, and my wife has gone to bed, and I go, you know what? I'll watch an episode of Star Trek. I'll watch a mock time, or I'll watch, and I pick one of my favorites and I watch it, and I watch it casually. And what I'm doing now is I'm watching it specifically to talk about it on the show. And what's amazing is I'm noticing all these things that even in a show that I've seen, I don't know how many times I've seen Corbomite Maneuver. It's probably well over 50. I don't know. I literally have no idea because I watched it over and over as a kid, but I saw all this new stuff today, or not today, the last few days when I was watching it. Yeah, amazing.
Well, this episode, because it was the very first episode that was filmed after it got sold, after Star Trek sold to NBC. And it was filmed between May 24th and June 2nd, 1966. It wound up being the 10th episode that aired, the 10th. So it came after Man Trap or No Man. It came after The Enemy Within. It came after The Naked Time. And the reason for that is because while it was basically a ship in a bottle episode, the visual effects were very complex. You have the starship Phasarius, you have the cube and Balok's little ship. There's so many challenging aspects to the visual effects of this episode. Again, never been done before, so it did take time. The cost for this episode, it actually came around $3,000 under budget. For the first season of Star Trek, the per episode budget was $193,500. And the cost of the Corbomite Maneuver was $190,430. And it's a good thing because as we'll talk about in later episodes, not every episode came in under budget. So the surplus that they had in the beginning came in really handy, probably by the next episode.
It's funny. I know these aren't the same dollars as $66, but it's just funny to think like the independent feature that I made about 10 years ago cost way more than an episode of Star Trek. It's just funny to think about.
Yeah, I mean, but even though when you look at the numbers and you look at this episode of Star Trek cost $190,000, that's like nothing. That's I mean, yeah, of course it's $1966 and it was a lot of money back then, but still, it just feels like nothing. And the episode was written by Jerry Saul, who was a science fiction author and had written a couple of cheesy B science fiction movies. The director of this episode is Joseph Sargent. It's the only episode of Star Trek that he ever directed. And it's not just that he directed the first proper episode, sort of setting the stage and setting the tone. He did something. He gave a certain actor on this episode a bit of direction that was extremely crucial to how this person would play this character. We'll get to that when we get into the our scene breakdowns. Okay, Steve, when you look at the Corbomite Maneuver, do you see them hitting the ground running? Do you see that they got so much right? Or do you sort of see how Star Trek is still a work in progress?
I think they hit the ground running 100%. I mean, do I think everything is perfect? No, I don't think everything is perfect, but the characters are there. And not only the characters there is that it fills out, and we'll get to all of this, but it fills out the ensemble, and all of the ensemble characters are there,
Well, this episode did represent a first for Star Trek in many ways. For one thing, like I said, it was the first episode to be filmed as a proper series. And this is the first time that we see the more familiar uniforms, the gold and the red and the blue. Some of the uniforms are still a work in progress. Like Spock has this like turtleneck, black turtleneck, and Sulu kind of has one too. Like you said, it's the first appearance of some of the other regulars, first appearance of McCoy, of Uhura, of Rand. It's the first time we see the male characters with pointed sideburns.
Key.
And the reason for that was because in the early stages of development, they were talking about, well, how do people wear their hair in the 23rd century? Maybe we should try to sort of make it look futuristic because, do they really part their hair to the side in the 23rd century? And of course, these actors have to go out in the real world when they're not filming Star Trek, and they're not going to want to have some funky do, even though Leonard Nimoy certainly did. So they came up with a very clever compromise to have the men have pointed sideburns in the 23rd century. Just a bit of history. When this episode did air on November 10th, 1966. It was around that time, November 11th, actually, that Gemini 12, the last of the Gemini space missions before Apollo, launched from Cape Canaveral with astronauts Jim Lovell and Buzz Aldrin aboard.
Wow.
And on November 9th, the day before this episode aired, this is definitely a landmark, certainly in music history, because it was on November 9th that John Lennon walked into the Indica Gallery in London and met Yoko Ono.
Wow. This is the moment. This is the moment, because isn't this where he sees a ladder and like climbs up the ladder and looks at the ceiling and sees? Is it like, does he look at a magnifying glass or something?
Yes, he took the magnifying glass that was hanging on a string, and he held it up to the ceiling, and through the magnifying glass, it said the word yes, and he just liked that it was something positive.
Yeah. It's so funny, the things that stick in your brain. And
Yeah.
I've always remembered the word yes.
Yep. Well, yes. You know, just going off topic here on my other true passion, in addition to Star Trek, which is the Beatles, is that November of 1966 was when the Beatles had kind of taken a bit of a break after their last concert in San Francisco, and they were gearing up to start recording songs like Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever and When I'm 64, which the last song in particular became part of Sgt. Pepper. But in the meantime, this is a great episode that starts in a way that is very similar to the way that The Cage started.
Yes, it's a great opening, and it's because they're reusing that idea of coming in on the top of the Enterprise and moving right into the bridge.
Stand by the photograph.
You see this image of Spock on the bridge, and it's a really interesting shot, the way they have the camera above everyone on the bridge. Like, you never actually saw this above the crew angle. And right from the beginning, we are establishing that the Enterprise is way the hell out there. And Spock even says that they're the only ship this far out. And one other thing that I immediately noticed, and I've always felt this way about the very early episodes of the original series, the cinematography, the lighting, the moody atmospheric lighting, the color gels that cinematographer Jerry Finnerman used on that show, the way he basically painted the set with lights. And no other show has ever, to this day, looked like Star Trek because of Jerry Finnerman's cinematography. It's just a gorgeous show to look at.
Well, and that paired with the brightly colored uniforms, it makes it completely unique. It is a completely its own world. And it's also why when they went back to those colors of the uniforms in 2009 Star Trek, it was just so great to see those ideas updated.
Sir, contact with an object. It's moving toward us.
There's so much tension that builds in this episode. A lot of it is built to a crescendo. And particularly in the teaser where they see the cube for the first time. The score, composed by Fred Steiner, kicks in. It's perfect because there's something playful about it, but there's also something foreboding and dangerous about it. Like, there's this colorful cube in space, and it's pretty small compared to the Enterprise, but it's holding them there. As we learn later, Spock calls it flypaper. And it's a great setup, and Kirk isn't even on the bridge yet.
It's so interesting. There's something, as most people know, I do another podcast called The Cinephiles that Scott has been an incredible guest on many times. And one of the things we talked about on that show as we explore great films is that, in my opinion, one of my theories of storytelling is that all stories are mysteries. They all have to start off as mysteries. And this is such a good example where it's like, there's a floating cube in space. We don't know what it is. We don't know why it's here. We don't know why it's tracking with us. We don't know if it's dangerous. And that mystery is going to propel us through this whole episode. What is this? What is going on?
And there's the qualities of the Corbomite Maneuver are such that here, most of the episode, 90% of the episode takes place on the Enterprise. Most of that on the bridge of the Enterprise. Mm-hmm. And again, this is the first episode that they filmed. And yet it feels like a stage play in a lot of ways, which is a good reason, I have to say, why this episode, when I was recording Star Trek on my tape recorder back in the 70s, this is before VCRs, before anything, visually, except maybe those photo novels, which I had. This was the only way that I had to memorize the dialogue. But this episode in particular really lent itself to audio only, because in many ways it's such a static episode. In a way, you're just basically on the bridge the almost the entire time.
What I love is that each one of those characters on the bridge, and this is why I think the ensemble is so strong, and we'll get into it, is really fully realized, and that really works as a stage play. Absolutely.
Well, you have Nichelle Nichols making her first appearance as Uhura. She's wearing a gold uniform, not the red that she would start wearing in late a couple episodes in. And you have the great setup. Spock is sitting in the captain's chair, and you hear Sulu say, "Captain Kirk to the bridge." Like, this is serious. Like, we haven't even there's like a buildup to the captain. We haven't even seen the captain. He's not on the bridge. He's got his shirt off in sick day. It's a great entrance.
Well, the other thing, in addition to introducing all the characters that we're going to come to love, we get to meet another character, which is Bailey. And what's so interesting to me about his character is each one of the episodes so far has actually focused on a guest star and the journey of the guest star. In The Cage, it's Vina. In Where No Man Has Gone Before, it's Gary Mitchell and Dr. Daner, and both of them have full character arcs. And now we have another one, this character of Bailey. And I love the moment where you could see who he is. He's bored when we meet him. And then when things start to go wrong, he starts not to panic, but gets emotional in a way you're really not supposed to on the bridge of the Enterprise.
It's blocking the way. Quite unnecessary to raise your voice, Mr. Bailey.
And Anthony Call is the actor who plays Bailey. And by the way, he's sitting in the same chair as Gary Mitchell did and Where No Man Has Gone Before. So there's something about the Navigator station in these early episodes. Yeah, you don't want to sit there.
Yeah.
Oh, you've been promoted to navigation. No. I think I'll stay
cool.
in there.
I'll just give me a red shirt. I'm sure I'll be fine.
Yeah. But Anthony Call, I mean, as we see throughout this episode, really gives a fully realized dynamic performance, a great range. And it's clear that maybe he shouldn't even be on the bridge in the first place. But when we come back from the opening credits, we hear the captain's log. First time that Kirk Shatner has said this in a proper episode of the original series, not a pilot. And he is in sickbay with his shirt off. Also a sign of things to come. But immediately you can feel the chemistry between William Shatner and DeForest Kelley. There's a very, very different dynamic between Kirk and McCoy and Kirk and Spock. There's a level of comfort between Kirk and McCoy that they feel like they can be completely honest with each other. And they definitely do, even when it reaches a boiling point, as it has oftentimes between Kirk and McCoy throughout the original series. And, Kirk is annoyed because the red alert is going off. The light is going off. He didn't hear the sound. He was annoyed because McCoy didn't tell him. And
and I think this is there's an expression in filmmaking and screenwriting, playwriting that's called show don't tell. And I teach directing, and it's one of the. We literally would spend a whole class talking about it. But the basic idea is that I don't want you to just tell you some information about something because that's boring. I want to make that information somehow active. And so we're introducing this character of McCoy. And just like in Where No Man Has Gone Before, that I think they nailed Spock in the moment of, you sure you don't know what irritation is? And, oh, that's one of your Earth emotions. I think that they also nail McCoy because they make the choice that he sees the red alert. We see that he sees the red alert, and this character makes the choice not to tell the captain. That is a completely bold choice for this thing to do. And that he's kind of making fun of the captain while he's doing these exercises. And so what do we know about him? We know he doesn't have respect for authority in the same way that the rest of this sort of military crew has. We know he has a different relationship, as you say, with Kirk. We know that he's got a sense of humor, and he's going to continually challenge things. And you get that in the first 25 seconds of meeting this character.
You could see the alarm lights flashing from there, McCoy. Why didn't you tell me?
Finally finished physical on you, didn't I?
So the other thing that happens in the with McCoy is we have our very first "I'm a doctor, not a..."
What am I, a doctor or a moon shuttle conductor?
Yeah, a lot of firsts in this episode.
Yeah.
Who knew that line would become such a signature running joke throughout 3 seasons of the show? And the other thing is, like, when you watch later episodes of Star Trek, especially by the time they get to the 3rd season, after the budget has been cut substantially and they couldn't afford things like extras walking around the Enterprise. But in the Corbomite Maneuver, when Kirk is making his way to the turbolift to go to his quarters to change to go to the bridge, and that feels like a busy starship. There are people running around all over the place. That feels like a starship. That feels like I felt like I was on an aircraft carrier watching that scene, because the production design was so fantastic.
I love Bailey's defensiveness with Spock. I wasn't panicking. It's just we have this thing called an adrenal gland.
It does sound most inconvenient, however. Have you considered having it removed?
And then Sulu is laughing and continuing the joke. Don't try to cross brains with Spock. Cut you to pieces every time.
Well, and this is what I mean about having an ensemble where the characters are developed, is that this character of Sulu, you get who this guy is right away. And what I love, and this is one of the things about Star Trek, there'd never been an Asian American character like this on television, as far as I know, that Asian American characters played cliches up to this point. And Sulu, right away, he's competent. You know that he's way in front of this blonde white guy sitting next to him. You know that he has a sense of humor. You know so much about him just from this moment in the movie.
By the time Kirk changes and gets to the bridge, this is the only time we've seen this particular shot of Kirk walking on the bridge. Because normally the camera is stationary and we see Kirk walk out onto the bridge. But this time, as the turbolift doors open, we follow him over. The camera is like right over his shoulder. But this is another scene that it really establishes the dynamic with, like, this is the captain of the Enterprise, that he goes around the room with his department heads, very similar to the way he did in Where No Man Has Gone Before. Just the confidence, the composure that Shatner displays, the command, if you will, is just right on point. And then Bailey jumps in. We have Vaser weapons. I vote we blast it.
I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Bailey, when this becomes a democracy.
I can't tell you how many times some version of that phrase has come into my head, both with my child when he says, "Dad, we need to do this." It's like, well, I'll take that advisement when this becomes a democracy. But also directing a film, it's because that's, directing a film's about leadership, and you have all your department heads who are and frequently advocating for their position. So the cinematographer wants more time spent on the lighting, and the production designer wants more money spent on the production design. And so you listen to all that, and then you take it under advisement when it becomes a democracy. You got it, when you're in the big chair, you got to make the decision.
One of the things that I've always loved are the scenes in the briefing room, because the dynamics there, the chemistry between the characters, and here's we've established that they've been held motionless for 18 hours. You see somebody pouring coffee, you see Sulu with his head on the briefing room table because they're probably exhausted from staying put for 18 hours. But I just love how they go around the room, and that's when Spock analyzes that the boy is like flypaper, and Kirk says, "Then we better not be sticking around. Negative and make us appear too weak." And then Kirk is about to give an order, and Bailey just jumps the gun, literally, by saying "bridge to phaser gun cruise," and he's like, "What are you doing?
But and this is what's so great is that you're establishing who this character who we're never going to see again in Star Trek, or maybe do we ever see him again?
Nope.
No, Bailey never shows up anywhere. But he is a fully realized character, and he is a character that has to learn these lessons. And because you have him, it gives an opportunity to show who Spock is. It gives opportunities to show who Sulu is, and it definitely gives opportunities to show who McCoy is. We're going to get into that later.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives opportunities to show who Kirk is. And I love that then Bailey goes to explain, and he says, "You're explaining, Mr. Bailey? I didn't request an explanation."
Yep.
It's such that is a leader being a teacher.
But he's also testing Bailey.
Yes, absolutely.
He's not letting him off the hook. He's prodding him. Like he wants to see what he's made of. And he finds out. But I like that Kirk is not standing down with Bailey. He's really holding him accountable for every reaction over the top as we see that he makes. It's something that definitely comes to a boiling point very, very soon. But when we're back on the bridge, again, the lighting, the cinematography, as we see the colors of the cube illuminate the bridge. And this scene in particular, where the Enterprise tries to pull away from the cube, is a great exercise in tension and suspense that just builds and builds to an explosive climax, literally an explosive climax. But I just love how initially everyone's very calm. They're just reporting on how far they are from the cube. The radiation's starting to increase. And then Fred Steiner's score kicks in again. It's getting worse. The cube is getting closer. The radiation is increasing. And Spock starts to raise his voice. I know you didn't like that in this first few episodes. I have to say I agree with you.
It's more reasonable in this one. You know what I mean? Like what's happening in the first few episodes is it's like some sort of, it seems like he's doing a military protocol, that I'm supposed to speak in this way for these orders. And now it sounds like he's speaking more loudly because it's loud.
It's loud. He has to. Yeah.
It makes more sense. It's so it doesn't bother me as much in this one.
Shatner played the scene perfectly because even as everyone around him is starting to get a little excited, Kirk is very cool. He's very composed. It was only when the cube got closer, and, it illuminated the room.
Phaser crew, stand ready.
As things start to build, and as the radiation builds, and as the cube gets closer, we see that Bailey is getting too excited. He's really shouldn't be on the bridge. He's not cut out for this job. He freezes.
Growing, we can take only a few more seconds of this.
Locked phasers on target. Mr. Bailey, locked phasers.
The next time we see a character freeze on Star Trek, he's basically court-martialed over it in Obsession with Lieutenant Garavik, and because he froze before he fired his phaser into the cloud. But in this case, Bailey freezing put the entire crew at risk. The Enterprise could have been completely destroyed right there.
Phasers locked. On target, sir. Fire main phasers.
And this is the first time that we see the Enterprise fire its phasers.
Wow.
And this first episode produced, but also by the time it aired 10 episodes in, we still had not seen the Enterprise fire its phasers. So even by 1966 standards, the scene of the Enterprise sort of backing away and firing those phasers and the cube exploding, and the explosion keeps going and going. Like it just didn't explode and that was the end of it. Like it just keeps going, just rocking the Enterprise. And it's such a great ending to the first act.
Is this also the first ship shake of the Enterprise? Is this the first one?
Yes, it definitely is.
This thing these guys had to get real good at is everybody move to the left, everybody stagger back, and sometimes
everybody move to the right.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a camera tilt to go along with it. And you know what? As a kid, this was 100% convincing to me.
And listen, like I said, the visual effects even by today's standards. When it comes to, we discussed this before about watching the original effects or watching the remastered effects. Most cases, I will watch the remastered effects because, first of all, they're great. I think they're a perfect complement to the interior scenes. Like, they didn't go overboard with new effects like George Lucas did with the first Star Wars movie. Right. They did it just right. They really, really did. But there are a couple of episodes where, by choice, I will absolutely watch the original effects. One of them is the Tholian web, because I just think those I think it won an Emmy for those effects, or maybe it was nominated. And the other is the Corbomite Maneuver, because scenes like the Enterprise firing its phasers, as we get later in the episode, scenes with the Fesarius. I think this episode is fantastic. And watching it, you go, oh, okay, I get why they had to wait 10 episodes to air it, because it took so long for them to finish the effects.
It's funny. I watched it with the new effects. I went back and watched all the effect sequences, the old effects. A, they're really similar. And B, the old effects are really good.
Yeah.
Particularly when we get to the Fesarius in the sense of scale. I mean, I think it's really well done.
So when we get to the second act, we find the Enterprise just parked in space, trying to figure out their next move. And it starts off with a scene that will become so familiar as Star Trek continued, is Kirk and Spock at Spock's station. And it's at this point, Kirk says, and again, this is why it's a shame that this was not the first episode that actually aired.
And if you're asking a logical decision to make...
No, I'm not. The mission of the Enterprise is to seek out and contact alien life.
So right there, he is saying what the mission is for people who have never knew what a Star Trek was.
That's a great point. I never thought about that. But yeah, there's nothing in the Man Trap that has the mission statement. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a monster of the week kind of episode. Whereas this really does. It really says what we are about.
Exactly. And it says what we are about to such an extent, Steve, that Kirk says it again later in the episode.
Has it occurred to you that there's a certain inefficiency in constantly questioning me on things you've already made up your mind about?
It gives me emotional security.
So there's a bit of jabbing going on between the two of them. It's such a moment of levity that I just love moments like that.
I think it's so great because it also shows, it's these little moments that shows you their relationship. And it shows, and this is something I mentioned, I think in the last episode, is the fallacy of Spock not having emotions, is that you see their friendship. You see Spock's sense of humor. You see him messing with people. You see all of these things. He's doing them in a subtle Spock way, but that character is so interesting. And and I'll say one other thing. One thing that didn't occur to me about us talking about this until you brought it up when we first met Shatner, when we first met Kirk, is I think a lot about leadership. Because I teach directing, I'm right now writing a book on directing. It didn't occur to me until you said it. So much of what I think about being a good leader comes from James T. Kirk. It's so, and just that moment. Often I need to, when I'm directing, bounce my thoughts off someone else and discuss things with them. It's not that I am abdicating making a decision. It's that you go through a certain process, and that's what Kirk's doing here. It's not that he would let Spock overrule him, but he is checking with Spock. He's reinforcing things with Spock. And just as he'll do in another way with McCoy, is using these people and then helping him to make the right decisions.
Not only is that established in this episode, but it is a process, it is a relationship, it is a dynamic that we see evolve. Because in this episode, Kirk's already made up his mind, even though he's checking with his first officer, his science officer, checking other things with his chief medical officer. But there are, I think, Star Trek's finest moments come when we see Kirk corrected by his science officer or his medical officer. The whole point of Star Trek is that we are striving to be better. And we make mistakes along the way. We're still not perfect. And I like when in later scenes where Kirk maybe makes a bad call and then learns from it. whether it's from the members of his crew or just from his own bad judgment.
You know what? It's another fantastic point because, and this is why I think Star Trek is such an instructive show. And I know we're going super slow, but this is why you and I are having so much fun doing it, is that things are not going to go right in your life. And particularly if you're going on any kind of a complicated endeavor, if you're going to try to make something, whether it's you want to open your restaurant or make a movie, or you're going to build your house, or whatever you're going to do, things are actually going to go wrong. And the point is that you learn. The point is not that you try to pretend you didn't make mistakes or pretend you're perfect. Is you go, okay, I made a mistake and now I'm correcting and moving forward. And that's what Kirk does over and over and over again. And certainly in this episode.
But also in this episode, we see Kirk he's so composed. He is really in the zone when it comes to making the right calls, practicing what he preaches and putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah.
There is so much about this episode that sets the stage for themes that we would explore a few times throughout the series.
Well, yeah. And even in this next scene with McCoy, McCoy challenges him about Bailey.
I'm especially worried about Bailey. Navigator's position's rough enough. Seasoned man.
I think he'll cut it.
This thing about Bailey, McCoy comes right at him. He challenges Kirk at every level. You promoted this guy too fast. You did it because he reminds you of yourself when you were younger. This is a mistake. He might not be ready for it. And he pushes and pushes, and he pushes hard. And this is the one of the many differences between Bones and Spock is that McCoy doesn't care. He does not need to worry about Kirk's a superior officer, or this is how things are supposed to. He's going to say what he thinks exactly how he thinks it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Spock, there's a respect between the two of them. Whereas with McCoy, his relationship with Jim is such that rank does not get in the way. And listen, the heated moments that happened over these 3 seasons between Kirk and McCoy are some of the best dramatic moments of the series. One in particular, I know I'm jumping way ahead, the scene in the cave in A Private Little War where Kirk challenges, or Kirk is challenged by McCoy for giving flintlocks to the Hill people. And they draw the relation to the brush wars in the Asian continent, Vietnam. And I love moments like that. So the scene between Kirk and McCoy in Kirk's quarters, after Kirk leaves the bridge and he assigns the bridge crew to do drills to get better. We need to be at 100%. And especially after Yeoman Rand walks in and we see Yeoman Janice Rand played by Grace Lee Whitney for the first time. Kirk, it's kind of a sexist scene. When I get my hands on the person who signed me a female yeoman, what's the matter, Jim? Don't you trust yourself? I mean, I get it, but back in 66, I guess. Yeah. You can't judge it. If it was filmed today, then yeah, I would judge it.
I also think it's funny that Yeoman Rand's bringing him a salad because Kirk's put on a few pounds. I think that's another. We have our heroic guy, and again, I know I said this thing before of all men, are somewhere between Captain Kirk and Homer Simpson. Is like, oh, Kirk wants to eat the unhealthy food, just like me. Like he's grumpy about having to eat the salad.
But when they're back on the bridge and after they get the alert that something much, much bigger is approaching the Enterprise, the building tension when Sulu goes,
"There, sir."
And you start to see the Thesarius take over the screen. And when the Enterprise approaches the Thesarius, and it keeps getting bigger and it keeps getting bigger before the Enterprise is like a little speck of dust compared to this thing. I mean, this was the first episode that they filmed.
It made such an impression on me as a kid, the size of that ship, because it dwarfs the Enterprise. And I just remember, we don't swear on this show, but that is a moment of, oh, there's a word that I would normally use. I mean, that is a moment of we're in deep, deep trouble.
Everyone on the bridge has their eyes wide open, is totally speechless. And at that moment, Leonard Nimoy says a word that came to define his character because of the way he said it. And the way he said it came from the direction of the series director, Joseph Sargent. And that was fascinating.
Fascinating.
Instead of being excited or emotional or screaming, he says with composure, with a level of childlike curiosity, fascinating. Like, whoa, that's his Keanu Reeves whoa moment. And just that one simple bit of direction from Joseph Sargent, it's basically Leonard Nimoy saying, I got you. I got it.
Yep.
I figured this out. Yep.
So I nodded my head when you said there was a moment. That was what I thought it was. I thought it was fascinating. It's so funny how an actor locks into a character. There's a story I remember from The Graduate, which is they're doing, Mike Nichols loves to do rehearsals, and he's working with the actors, and he goes up to Anne Bancroft and it's like, after they did a rehearsal, and he's like, "No, that's not it. You're not getting it." And she's getting frustrated and like, "I don't know what you want. I don't know what you want me to do." And Nichols goes, "Do you mind if I give you a line reading?" Because generally as a director, saying an actor's line for them is a really bad idea. It's considered very rude. It's offensive. That's not what directors generally do. But sometimes it's all you could do. And Bancroft says, "Sure. Yeah, just show me what you want." And he says one line, and Anne Bancroft goes, "Oh, I know what that is. That's anger." And from that point on, the character clicked. It just one idea, and then suddenly she locked it in. And I think you're totally right. Fascinating.
What was the line from The Graduate? I got to know.
They don't. They never said. They never
Wow.
said. I don't know the answer. Hi, everyone. This is Steve jumping in for a minute because after my conversation with Scott, I realized I had to figure out what line it actually was. And after a little bit of research, I found out that the line Mike Nichols did for Anne Bancroft is, "Benjamin, would you drive me home?" That's it. That's where she found the key to her character.
When you get to episodes like Naked Time, and you get to Balance of Terror and Dagger of the Mind, What a Little Girl's Made Of, certainly Conscience of the King, you can feel that Leonard Nimoy has a much, much better grasp on Spock. But I love that he was spending like the first few episodes, like Mud's Women and Enemy Within, and even The Man Trap. It's like he's still finding his way. But he said that direction from Joseph Sargent helped me zero in on like such a huge percentage of what that character came to be. One word, and it was in the first properly shot episode. Fascinating. I mean, Leonard Nimoy might still be trying to figure it out as Spock in that episode, but his delivery of that line was pitch perfect, right on point, and very, very much Spock. And Kirk, still very composed, addresses the crew, tells them, keep calm. This is what the starship is all about, basically.
Well, and as this is happening, we're dealing with the Sirius. Bailey freezes multiple times. Sulu has to do something for him. And what I love about what that's setting up is that you're going, man, I think McCoy was right. He is failing on the bridge in important situations.
And you hear Uhura say for the first of many times,
"Hailing frequencies open, sir."
Addressing Baylock. And when we finally hear Baylock's voice, it's played by Ted Cassidy, is the voice of Baylock.
Really?
Ted Cassidy from the Addams Family.
Of course it is. Now that you say that, of course that's his voice.
This is Baylock, commander of the flagship Viserius of the First Federation.
It's a pretty imposing voice. He also had a featured guest starring role in What Are Little Girls Made Of as Ruck. The Enterprise is really in a bad place right now. You feel the tension, you feel the danger, and you feel that the stakes are very, very, very high.
Your ship must be destroyed. We therefore grant you 10 Earth time periods, known as minutes, to make preparations.
And then you have Anthony Call as Bailey freak out.
I don't understand this.
And he gets up out of his chair. Kirk is composed.
Let's find out what they want us to do.
They want us to lose our heads.
We've
Bailey,
only
now.
got 8 minutes left.
7 minutes and 41 seconds.
He's doing a countdown.
Yeah, he's doing a countdown. And then he just, what are your robots? I mean, wow. That was great drama. Anthony Call, great performance in this episode.
So I think this sequence is amazing too. And there's so many things about it that I think are great. One of the things is this is the first of a thing we have happen a lot in Star Trek is we're all going to die. That, some kind of ticking clock. And I love the way they bounce around through all of our ensemble and see what they're thinking. I love that Sulu's doing that countdown. I love that you see everyone's levels of stress, but also how they're handling it. And I have to tell you, Scott, this is a thing that I have thought about. What would I do in those 10 minutes? Would I be Bailey or would I be Sulu? Would I have the wherewithal to come up with the solution? And we never know. I remember I literally had a dream where I dreamt I was on the plane that was going down, wow. And it was like, okay, you have 8 minutes. And I remember like going through, all right, I'm going to die. And I'm, I just, and so this moment of this build, I totally get why Bailey freaks out, it's amazing that everyone else is so well trained and so awesome that they don't.
Well, at this point, we do start to see the tension get to Kirk a little bit. Kirk establishes contact with Baylock again. He tries to further reason with him, saying, if you've studied our ship's records, you know where we come in peace. And in the middle of him reasoning, you hear communication build, basically interrupting Kirk. And Baylock saying,
you now have 7 minutes left.
And that's the end of Act 2. Baylock will not be reasoned with. He's going to destroy the Enterprise.
Well, the feeling of being trapped, the feeling of we can't move because we're trapped in a tractor beam. We can't fire on them. They have way more power than us. We can't communicate. They're not letting me talk to you.
Right.
Like we came totally in peace. We're happy to just leave and we can't even talk. There's a real helplessness here.
And when we get to the beginning of the third act, in which we hear yet another countdown from Baylock, Kirk is now standing alongside Spock at his station saying, he says, what's the matter with him out there? Spock makes the observation.
Chess. When one is outmatched, the game is over. Checkmate.
Is that your best recommendation?
And another great moment, perfectly played by Leonard Nimoy. Spock is about to say, I'm sorry, but he stops himself. He goes, and then he stops and he goes, I regret that I can find no other logical alternative. He composes himself because he can't say, I'm sorry. That's not the Spock thing to do. So
and again, this goes to like Spock has emotions, like that moment of him about to say, I'm sorry and look down. That is, I feel really, really bad. Like I feel a sense of failure. I feel that I failed you. And then composing himself. And this jumps us way ahead. One of my all-time favorite moments of Leonard Nimoy acting as Spock is in Wrath of Khan when he straightens his uniform.
Oh, right.
The very end is that he composes himself and stands in the way that he is supposed to. And this is a similar moment of he's having an emotional thing and he composes himself and gives the military answer.
You're referring to the scene in the radiation chamber in engineering at the end of Wrath of Khan. Yeah. Right. He's about to die of radiation poisoning and he gets up and he composes his uniform. Yeah, that's a very subtle touch, but very Spock. So tensions are already high on the bridge. You can cut it with a knife. And Kirk is back in his chair. McCoy walks back on the bridge to basically say to Kirk about Bailey, I told you so.
I intend to challenge your actions in my medical records. I'll state that I warned you about Bailey's condition. Now, that's no bluff.
And Kirk snaps back at him.
Anytime you can bluff me, Doctor.
On the bridge in front of everybody.
And there's looks. Yeah, there's reactions around the room.
Yeah, that's not something that happens a lot in front of everyone.
I think this moment is so great. And it's so funny because I think McCoy is completely wrong They literally have 2 minutes to live. They're counting down to the death of every single person on the ship. And McCoy thinks this is the moment that he should come in and criticize a personnel choice that Kirk made. It is terrible. And yet that's McCoy. That's his character. And of course, it is this exchange that leads us to our solution.
Because that exchange taps into the resourcefulness of Captain James T. Kirk, where he says,
"Not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker."
That is the turning point of this episode, because it's at that moment that, regardless of the stakes, Kirk is taking control back of the situation. And he's taking a risk, because risk is our business. But then he tries his hand to pull off the Corbomite Maneuver.
It is a material and a device which prevents attack on us. If any destructive energy touches our vessel, a reverse reaction of equal strength is created.
And I love that Balak says, you have 1 minute left. And he goes, destroying the attacker.
Death has little meaning to us. If it has none to you, then attack us now. We grow annoyed at your foolishness.
Boom! That is Captain Kirk, folks.
It's the full Kirk. And what I love about it is that we go from this moment where he is on edge. I mean, he's lost his temper with McCoy. He's scolded Spock. He's as ruffled as almost we ever see Kirk. And then to pull off this bluff, he pulls it all together, and the swagger that comes out. I mean, that moment is so great. Like, you just love this guy right then, you know?
And I love the looks that everyone gives him. So Sulu looks back at him to be like, what is he doing? And Scotty's looking at him like, wow, like impressed. Like, he is impressed with this guy. And even Spock is like, okay, I see what you're doing here, Captain. It's such a great moment. And it's the moment that Kirk composed himself. And like, remember, okay, this is what that scene is. It's the scene from Star Trek 3 after the Klingon commander has killed David, okay? And Kirk has fallen backwards, said, you killed my son. And then he composes himself, stands back up, says, what is the crew compliment of a bird of prey? I swear to you, we are not finished yet. This is that moment from Star Trek 3. This is the moment where Kirk says, yeah, things look pretty bad, but we're going to go out on our terms.
Well, and think about, we've been talking about these things that we're learning from Kirk. And we talked about learn from your mistakes. We talked about how to consult with the other people, take the challenges of the people around you. And now we're seeing this other one is pick yourself up. Kirk is never, ever going to quit. As bad as things are, and I think that Star Trek 3 reference is exactly right. That is arguably one of the 2 or 3 low points in his entire life. And after a moment, he picks himself up and he goes, we're not done yet.
We're not done yet. I swear to you, we're not finished yet. And that's the moment that we reach with Kirk on the bridge in the Corbomite Maneuver. And then the bridge door opens and Bailey comes back with his tail very much between his legs, much more composed, permission to return to post. McCoy looks at him and smiles. Kirk just looks back straight ahead with a half smile on his face and says, permission granted. And they have 10 seconds left. And those 10 seconds come and go. Nothing happens.
Interesting game, this poker.
It does have advantages over chess.
Love to teach it to you.
Oh, that's the best, because that's McCoy. Yeah.
They hear from Balak, who says, we want proof of your Corbomite device. And Kirk continues. He still shows that he's got the upper hand now. And before Uhura can open hailing frequencies, he goes, wait a minute. Let him sweat for a change. And just the admiration. Everyone's looking back at Kirk going like, oh my God, you are so cool, Brewster. I mean, it's such a great moment. And then he goes, ship to ship. And he goes, request denied. Oh, it's so great.
And then cuts it off. And then
cuts it off. Cuts it off. Right.
I love that. By the way, I have a question for you. That's something that does, and maybe you know the answer to this. when Sulu's counting down and he gets to a minute, he says 1 minute, and then he says, I knew he would.
I know why he said that.
Why does he say that?
He says that, he goes, 1 minute, I knew he would, because there was an audio cue that was supposed to go into that moment that was not added in post-production. The minute that Sulu says 1 minute, we were supposed to hear Baylock then say 1 minute.
Oh.
And then after he said, so Sulu was going to say 1 minute, then you hear Baylock say 1 minute, and then Sulu goes, I knew he would. So that's why.
Oh, yeah, I wonder why they left it in. Like it just seems so obvious to be a mistake.
Yeah, it was a mistake. So that's a good eye or good ear, I should say. But yeah, so that's what happened. It just got by them in production. You know what? I'm amazed that for a series, Steve, that has been around now for 55 years, that has been observed, dissected, absorbed, rewatched hundreds and hundreds of times, that there aren't more moments that don't hold up under scrutiny. The fact that so much of the series does hold up under scrutiny is a testament to Roddenberry, Bob Justman, Gene Kuhn, Dorothy Fontana, all of the writers and producers of the series, that it holds up as well as it does, except for that moment that you pointed out.
And then it basically works. The bluff works. They back down.
The Enterprise is then taken under tow from a much smaller vessel that emerges from the Viserys. There's not out of the woods yet, but the game's afoot, as Shakespeare would say, because something is still going on. Like, why would Baylock leave this giant ship and run the risk of going against the Enterprise in a ship that's about the size of the bridge, maybe a little bigger?
By the way, we get a whole bunch more shakes. A lot of shakes in this sequence.
Yes. So as we begin Act 4, just like we had the building tension when we first see the cube, and we have the building tension when the Enterprise tries to back away from the cube, and you have that big explosion. Now you have another scene of great tension where the Enterprise tries to break away from Baylock's smaller vessel. And this is another great scene of tension, of action, great sound effects, great lighting, definitely terrific music once again from Fred Steiner. His score during this moment is fantastic.
So, you know how I said that I have a criticism of this episode? This is where it is that I think they go to the long, slow tension build with the music, dun, 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 with that music, which I like. They go to that well too many times, and it's too long, particularly with the primitive special effects. It's like, we're looking at a cube. We're looking at a cube getting closer. The cube's getting brighter. The temperature's going up. We have that one. We have the trying to get away from the cube. We have the countdown, the 10-minute countdown. Then we have this one where we're trying to get away. It takes a long time.
But at the same time, Steve, I hear what you're saying, but I also think that these moments are where we see just how powerful the Enterprise is. I think that the Enterprise is just as much of a character throughout Star Trek as Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and, the rest of them. But we see that this ship is sturdy, it's reliable, it's powerful. It's like the Millennium Falcon in The Empire Strikes Back. It takes a licking and keeps on ticking.
Well, and I think that the Enterprise is one of the few vehicles that are up at the Millennium Falcon level, of just being so filled with character. But I did, and this is just it's the editor in me that's like, okay, we could get everything that we wanted and have it not take quite as long. I also think this is a moment where if I showed this to my 9-year-old son, he would go, come on. Because this doesn't hold up today with what we're used to in terms of special effects because it's so long. That's my issue with it. I do love, though, that as the tensions, because basically it sounds like the ship's about to explode. We've used everything we have. And then what does Kirk say? He says, okay, impulse engines too. We're risking everything on this one moment that we can get away.
They do indeed break away because Baylock's ship is no match for the power of the Enterprise at this point. See, this is the moment when the Enterprise breaks away. They could have gotten out of there. They could have gotten out of Dodge. And so what does Kirk do? He makes a command decision to approach Balok's vessel and prepare a landing party.
Why does he make that decision?
He makes that decision because this is what Star Trek is about. He makes that decision because he repeats what he said in the beginning of this episode, or at least in the beginning of the second act. He says,
"What's the mission of this vessel, Doctor? To seek out and contact alien life, and an opportunity to demonstrate what our high-sounding words mean."
Now, isn't that a captain? Isn't that a character that you would follow into a burning, active volcano? I know I would. I thought that was a bold move because he could have turned away. And this is a character trait of Kirk that we see repeated throughout the series. So he could have turned away. He goes back to investigate. Maybe Balok's in trouble.
Well, that's the thing. Because I think it's not just we want to contact them. It's that Uhura says it's a distress signal and the signal's so weak, I don't think it's going to get there. This is a rescue mission. It's not just that we want to contact some aliens, which is our job, which they do. It's that Kirk is saying this ship that has done nothing but try to kill us for the last hour, we're going to go back because they're in trouble.
This is something that when we get to Arena, Kirk could kill the Gorn and save the Enterprise, and that's that. But he says, no, I'm not going to kill you.
We can decide we're not going to kill today. Right.
Just like you said in A Taste of Armageddon.
Taste of Armageddon, yeah.
And just like in Spectre of the Gun, he could have killed Morgan Earp shot him in the face, after he beats the crap out of him at the OK Corral. But instead, he puts the gun down, and the Melkoshian says, you didn't kill. And Kirk says, we fight only when there's no choice.
Just as we said in the first several episodes, there are these themes that go throughout Star Trek, and this is one of them, of mercy and compassion, even towards someone that you have a conflict with. So what we've seen so much of what makes Kirk a great captain. We've seen his willing to learn from mistakes, learn from other people. We've seen his courage, his getting himself up when he's down. We've seen his ability to bluff, which is really, really key. We've seen his desire to explore, and also his compassion.
His compassion. And that these are the qualities that have made Star Trek so aspirational, that have inspired so many people, that have made the relationship between these characters so fully realized, where people watching the series became scientists and doctors and astronauts. That's what I mean. What I said in the beginning of this of the show, I said that this episode really captures the spirit of Star Trek more than most of the other episodes in terms of this mission statement and the elaboration where Kirk says the opportunity to demonstrate what those high-sounding words mean. That's basically the risk is our business of the first season.
I love that Kirk is putting together his landing party, and he says, Dr. McCoy, who's like, do I have a choice? And then he says, Bailey. Why? For a taste of the unknown. And I love that, because this is the thing, is that the journey, the character arc, Kirk doesn't have a character arc in this episode. Spock doesn't have a character arc. McCoy doesn't have a character arc. They go through things. They learn things. But Bailey has a fully realized character arc, from the guy who's bored when we meet him, a little bit scared, overwhelmed, frozen, panicked, gets his courage back up, comes back on the bridge to be a part of it, and now he's actually going on the mission. He's facing the thing that scared him the most.
So we get to the transporter room, and they're about to beam over, and they're told to crouch down because Reed's a little cramped over there. And now this is the big reveal. Like, we're going to meet Balok, like, in the flesh, but it's not flesh. It's a puppet. It's an avatar. That's not who Balok really is. Then we see who Balok really is. And it's young Clint Howard, the brother of Ron Howard. Now, here's the interesting thing. In the early draft for the Corbomite Maneuver, which the original story outline was entitled Danger Zone. And the original treatment that Jerry Saul wrote for the Corbomite Maneuver, it was missing a lot of elements that we see in the final episode, like Bailey's breakdown, some of the smart comments that Spock made, with regards to the adrenaline gland. But one thing that was definitely missing was this last clever reveal, the twist in this episode, where we see who Baylock really is. In the original version of the story, after the Enterprise pulls away from Baylock's ship, they beam him over, and he's a humanoid. And they help him and they save him. But it was the network executive named Stan Robertson who said that, the episode's really good, but I don't like the way it ends. So Gene Roddenberry took a pass at Jerry Soul's screenplay that Jerry Soul was quite happy for him to do because he did make it better. And it was Roddenberry's idea to have Baylock be an avatar, and we see the real Baylock, and he's a kid. And everybody remembers the end of that episode.
It's so joyful, and I think Clint Howard does a great job, and the voice. I don't know who does the voice. Do you?
No, actually, I don't.
Yeah, because it's the combo of this different voice, more adult voice coming out of this kid, and the joy of his performance is really, really great. Yeah. And I love the slow adjustment as Kirk figures it out. Figures out, oh, now I understand what this is. This was a test. He was testing us. He's not a bad guy. He's a good guy. And I love even the moment, how much have you wanted to drink some Tranya? Let me just ask you that question.
This is Tranya. I hope you relish it as much as I.
Listen, that line has been part of fandom for, all these years, 55 years. And so, Clint Howard, he was a little kid, so he had to drink grapefruit juice. That's what Tranya really is.
Oh, wow.
But whenever I drink grapefruit juice or orange juice, I think it's Tranya. Even after Kirk and McCoy and Bailey are a little hesitant before they drink the Tranya, and they realize that it really is just grapefruit juice. And then,
oh no, I think their reaction is, this is really good. Like, I think they totally taste it like, oh, I think Tranya looks delicious.
But then just the way they bond, the way that Baylock and Kirk bond over their ships, over being captains. It's such a tender moment. It's so profound and poignant because it again solidifies what Star Trek is all about, the spirit of Star Trek, about the ability to learn from another culture, to seek out and contact alien life, to explore strange new worlds where there it sits. Sorry, I know I'm quoting Captain Picard at that moment, but think about it, Steve. How many episodes of Star Trek do we really see the Enterprise exploring strange new worlds? So many of them are responding to a distress call, or they're at a starbase for repairs, or, the Enterprise is under attack by something. How many times do we actually get to see the Enterprise boldly go where no one has gone before and really be far out where it's going to take 6 months for their message to release to get to a Starfleet command? It really didn't happen all that much, but this episode, it did. And that's why this episode sets it up a whole lot better than the Man Trap, and even better than Where No Man Has Gone Before. It's a shame that they were not able to get the visual effects done in time for this to be the first episode.
Well, and now we're drinking Tranya with Bailey. What do we end up with? Is that they talk about a cultural exchange and having an officer stay with Baylock on the ship to learn. And Kirk says,
"Do you know where we can find a volunteer, Mr. Bailey?"
And the camera pushes in on Bailey, and he, with this great smile, this just joyful smile, he says, "Me, sir."
"Me, sir, I'd like to volunteer."
That is a great moment, Steve. And like you mentioned, I love the way you pointed out all the beats of the evolution of Bailey throughout this episode. For him to reach this point where he is volunteering for the unknown, and doing it in a way that he's clearly happy and comfortable and excited about. It is, this episode has so much tension, so much drama, all the drama between Kirk and McCoy, anything that has Bailey, all the drama with Baylock. And here is this final moment that is so compassionate, so empathetic, so deeply moving. And, that line that Kirk says, there's no such thing as the unknown, only things temporarily hidden. And here's this moment where he's proven right, because the reveal of Baylock is of aspiration and hope, of cultural exchange, of expansion of knowledge. I mean, this is Star Trek. This moment right here is Star Trek. And as they're making their way around the Fisarius, let me show you my vessel. We are both alike, Captain, both proud of our ships. It's such a beautiful, beautiful ending to this episode. And the more I've talked about it now, maybe I should put it in my top 10. It really is amazing.
It's really good. I love that he's holding hands because it's so sweet. Well, and I think the other thing that we discover is that the alien that we thought was so different, what's our last moment? We're very much alike. Like that's sort of the lesson of the show.
But this episode was nominated for a Hugo Award in 1967 for Best Dramatic Presentation.
Can I tell you something sad?
Tell me something sad.
So you know how when we started this show that I said that there's so much of my values come from Star Trek, and this philosophy of I have this person I perceive as my enemy, but I still actually care about them. I'm going to go on the rescue mission for the enemy. This is one that I really, really believe in, that if there's someone you have a conflict with, if you can reach out, if you can show compassion to them, the lesson that the show teaches me is that you can heal whatever the rift is. You can overcome it.
Absolutely.
That is so central to my belief system. And the sad thing about it is that there are sometimes people that are out to get you. And there are sometimes people that will take advantage of that. And I've had it happen to me many times where I did exactly this. I reached out to someone, saying, hey, I care about you, someone who I had a conflict with, or even like negotiating a deal where it's like, how much you get paid. And I always am trying to be fair to the other side. And if I'm trying to be fair to the other side and the other person is trying to get as much as they want, I don't end up very well in that situation. And I definitely have had, in particular, one very painful friendship conflict where someone wanted to end their friendship with me and I kept trying to make it right. And it really took a long time for me to realize, oh no, they really want to hurt me.
Yeah.
And so every time I tried to expose myself and show compassion, I got hurt more. And yet, this is still my philosophy. I'm still going to go try to do the kind thing first. That's still how I'm going to behave, but it also means sometimes you get hurt,
Steve, I have been there many times myself. I think I have picked up so much through Star Trek, overtly and also subconsciously. I've always prided myself on doing my best to be a kind person, to be a generous person, to help people out. And I have definitely helped people out. And sure. I've learned the hard way that sometimes you really got to watch your back.
Yeah.
That people are out for themselves. Mm-hmm. And yet in certain situations where I have sort of been burned, so to speak, I would still reach out and do something for the other person after the fact. Still, because that's just the person I am. I mean, I think I'm a little better about it now in terms of being more guarded, but like seeing the red alert signs a little bit more clear. But I'm still that person. I'm still the person that would go and beam over to Baylock's ship. I'm still the person that would tell the Metrons, no, don't kill the Gorn. I'm still the person who would not shoot Morgan Earp in the face.
Yeah. And it's funny, maybe this is too inside baseball, but actually I saw this happen with both you and I, because when we first started talking about the show, the first thing, both of us were a little bit guarded. even though I think we both wanted to do it, but there was also, you've been hurt enough and I've been hurt enough in partnerships and things like that, where we approached it with a little bit of trepidation. And then I saw you do exactly what you said, because right when we were talking, and it deeply touched me, was you were worried about how we were dividing up work and you wanted to make sure that it was fair, and that's because you love Star Trek,
Listen, you and I have been talking about this for a long time, about doing this Star Trek series, Enterprise Incidents, and here we are now, 3 episodes in, and I'm so glad that we are doing this. To that moment that we did have, we were definitely sort of like doing the dance around each other,
doing a little dance.
But we both came from the same exact place in terms of wanting to do it for the right reasons, but also being guarded. And ultimately, we both went in to rescue Baylock,
right.
So here we are. I mean, we have talked about the Corbomite Maneuver for much longer than that episode actually ran. But that's the beauty of Enterprise Incidents is, if you're listening at this point, then you love it as much as we do. And, what's your final take on the Corbomite Maneuver? What's the legacy of this episode?
Well, what's cool doing this with you is I've actually learned stuff about this episode. This episode I've seen over and over and over again that I didn't know. And the big takeaway for me now is what you pointed out, is that this is such the mission statement of Star Trek. And so many of the themes and the ideas and the things that draw me to Kirk as a leader, to how the ensemble works together, to Bailey's character arc, which is connected perfectly to the theme of the show. All of those things really come together. And yes, I do think there's certain sections that are too long, in my opinion, but that's just a small nitpick. Like, I also think that I really wonder exactly what Baylock was trying to do, because he could have killed them over and over and over again. So, like, this is a pretty dangerous experiment he was running on them. But that being said, it's a really good episode of television, and it's amazing to me that this is number 3.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, I've said all throughout this episode how this episode, the Corbomite Maneuver, just represents everything that Star Trek is all about. There are very few episodes that rise to the level of the mission statement of Star Trek, quite like the Corbomite Maneuver. And just a reassessment of this episode has made me like this episode, which I have always really, really liked a lot, love it a whole lot more. I just think that William Shatner's performance in this episode is just absolutely magnificent, pitch perfect. His performance, I have to say, in the first 2 seasons of the show, where he was right on. I mean, this guy was a Shakespearean actor, and this was a show that didn't have a precedent. And I have to tell you, that back in 2017, I was moderating a stage interview with William Shatner at a Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. I mean, honestly, it was a high point of my life. Like, if you would have told this 6-year-old kid that I was going to be talking to Captain Kirk in front of 5,000 people, never would have believed it. But, I've seen Shatner at conventions over the years, and, sometimes fans ask really kind of ridiculous questions. So I wanted my interview with him to be about Hollywood in the 60s, like making a television in the 60s. Like, what was it like on the lot? What was going on in the times? Like what was Gene Coon really like? But I said to him, and because we talked about this in Where No Man Has Gone Before, like, you had Kirk down. Like, how did you know how to play this guy? You had him down from the very first scene in Where No Man Has Gone Before. How did you do that? And he replied, I thought of Kirk as the hero standing with his back arched, his head tilted back, his eyes towards the horizon, a hero type.
Yeah. That's
how I play Kirk. And he said, he read the Horatio Hornblower books that, Roddenberry recommended to him. I just think, when you look at an actor and a character and look at just how much that actor was meant to play this character, and you look at Shatner as Kirk, he was born to play this guy. And as great as he was in Where No Man Has Gone Before, he was even better here.
So I know this episode's going on forever, but you just mentioned Horatio Hornblower. I've read those books many times. I like them a lot. In the sense of adventure, I think they totally relate to Star Trek. I have never understood Horatio, the character of Horatio Hornblower, is the farthest thing from Captain Kirk. He is neurotic, kind of stiff, extremely silent, doesn't make friends. He is distant, cold, and totally massively insecure. Like it's literally nothing whatsoever like James D. Kirk. Although the sense of adventure is certainly similar. One last thing that I just want to say at the very end: the addition of DeForest Kelley to Star Trek is so key, and you see it throughout this entire show how much he is adding to this TV show.
Absolutely, and DeForest Kelley up to this point was better known for playing heavies, the baddies, the villains, mostly in Westerns. Ironically, he was in Gunfight at the OK Corral, and yet he returned. He was Morgan Earp in Gunfight at the OK Corral, and he later returned to the OK Corral, Inspector of the Gun. He was on TV shows like Death Valley Days, Perry Mason, The Fugitive, Have Gun, Will Travel, and he did the TV movie Police Story, which was produced by Roddenberry. And when you have McCoy in the mix, as we see in just the next couple of episodes, when you get the three of them together, there is a magic to Star Trek that has never been equaled, and it's still just the very greatest relationship in all of Star Trek.
This has been such an incredible conversation, Scott. And if you want to continue to hear these conversations, please subscribe to the show. You can check us out on YouTube. You can go to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, even Audible. But please, 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 if there's a chance to review the show, do it. It's super important to having other people find us. And if you want to follow the show on social media, you can do it on Facebook. Search for Enterprise Incidents. Enterprise Incidents is our handle on Instagram. Enter Incidents is our handle on Twitter. But Scott, what if people just wanted to talk to you on social media? How would they do that?
Well, let's see. If they wanted to talk to me about Enterprise Incidents, or they wanted to talk to me about movies, which is really my main vein there. But also you want to talk to me about the Beatles, the best place to do that is at Movie Mance on Twitter, and check out my photos about my awesome Q&As with filmmakers at Movie Mance on Instagram. But please do hit us up on Twitter, because I know that we are very, very excited to hear what you think so far of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. And we read them all, and we will respond to your posts, to your comments. We want to know what you think, so please do hit us up. So where can people hit you up for Enterprise Incidents and the Cinephiles and everything else, Steve Morris?
SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And if you really want to hear Scott talk about the Beatles, and I love the Beatles too, and so does my partner John Roca, you might want to check out our episode on Hard Day's Night on the Cinephiles. And if you just like listening to music, well, we've also done Singing in the Rain and West Side Story. They're great, great episodes. But the episode I'm most excited about, we just had the Corbomite Maneuver. I'm assuming things could only get better from here. What is next for the crew of the Enterprise, Scott?
Well, the good news, Steve, is that things do get better. The bad news is they don't necessarily get better with the very next episode. However, the very next episode of Enterprise Incidents is still a worthy episode to listen to, because it is still a seminal episode. It is still the second episode ever produced as a TV series for Star Trek, and it features a character that is beloved among Star Trek. And in terms of the original series, one of the few times, I would say one of the only times really, that they had a major guest star return for the second season. So the next episode of Enterprise Incidents, we're going to get into flaws and all, is on Mudd's women. So until the next episode of Enterprise Incidents, you know what to do. Keep going boldly.